Okay, if you got a velomobile, do you ever find yourself in the situation where the street is so unsafe that you need to go up on the sidewalk, but on the other hand there's so many pedestrians on the sidewalk that it's hard to cycle around, or just any situation? Well, for me, it's happened a bit. I've got the roll-off internal hub on here, and the gearing isn't low enough, and plus I'm in my mid-60s. I'm not strong enough to power up a hill that's much steeper than 5%, so it's quite often I will have to get out and push or pull this thing. I've tried various ways to do it. I've locked the steering in place and then going up on the road shoulder, and then every once in a while you have to, well, more than every once in a while, it's almost constant having to steer by lifting the back end here. So finally, I think I figured this out. Well, I've tried it out and it works. This little contraption here, it weighs 125 grams, and it allows me to steer from, as I'm walking along, like just pushing it and steering like that, right? So very convenient. And then if I've got 35 pounds of camping gear in there, and I'm going up a 10% grade, I still have cord from the back here, and still pull it along that way. And I think even put the race hood down. Visor up, and I can even steer it like that, and also pull it back. And the secret are these 3/8 inch thick little Teflon. It comes in sheets, 3/8 inch thick sheets of Teflon I got from Lee Valley, and so I drilled 7/8 inch hole through 2 of them, and you can kind of see, and then I cut into it both ends, but you can kind of see that these teeth sort of come together a bit, so it will snap onto the tiller, the top of the tiller. Other than that, it's dowel, poplar dowel material from Canadian Tire. This thing is also just, it's poplar. It's in the dowel section, but it's square section. Dowel material from Canadian Tire, and the only other thing here is this base, which everything bolts onto, is 5-ply 1/4 inch plywood. So yeah, it really saves me a lot of headaches. So that's about it for the velo stuff on this video. On not the previous video, but the next to last video, I think it was number 8, I went into deliberative democracy and citizen assemblies quite a bit, but it's such a complex subject that there's some more stuff I wanted to to go over on that. Like, what sort of subjects are sufficiently critical to need a citizens' assembly, like to essentially do an end run around how our politics and governance are normally done. Back in 2022, there's a magazine called the Literary Review of Canada. So January, February issue 2022, Graham Young, who's a professor at Glasgow University in Scotland, he recommended just essentially getting rid of the Canadian Senate and replacing it with a revolving series of citizens' assemblies. Of course, that would take, a constitutional change, and I believe all the provinces would have to be in on it. But the Canadian Senate right now is not held in very high esteem by the average citizen, anyways. It's unelected, so this would be a great way to do an end run around that, and for all the reasons I mentioned, all in the video number 8. In that video, I also mentioned a prime subject matter for citizens' assembly in Canada or in individual provinces would be the carbon tax issue, because that's kind of tearing us apart right now. A couple other issues come to mind. South of the border, their electoral system, like significant number of the population don't trust how the elections are run. So I would think that would be prime subject matter for citizens' assemblies in each state to try and figure out what is the voting system and the counting of votes, how best to do that so that people trust it. You need trust in democracy for democracy to work. Another one that comes to mind, and this is way in the past, but like 40 years ago in Alberta, we Albertans elected a football player to become our premier, Don Getty. And this was after we had probably one of the best premiers Alberta's ever had, Peter Lougheed. He more or less got the oil sands going, but he set aside a certain amount of the profit coming out of there going into the Heritage Trust Fund, which would be similar to what Norway has today. Norway is sitting on $2 trillion in the black. Like, pretty much every citizen in Norway is a millionaire right now, because they started about the same time as Alberta did, with the North Sea oil and whatnot, but they were smart enough to put a little bit in the bank each year, and so was Peter Lougheed, but then we elected this football player, Don Getty, and then after him we elected Ralph Klein, a guy with a drinking problem, and they just decimated the Heritage Trust Fund. So now last time I checked, but this was a year or so ago, it was at $17 billion. Seems like a lot of money, but not when you compare it to $2 trillion. So back then, this is a theoretical subject for a citizens' assembly. it would have been great to have a citizens' assembly instead of the football player decide what to do, how to save money for the future. Because I have no doubt that a random assembly of citizens, if they're given all the necessary information, they would have said, yeah, we've got children and grandchildren, let's put some aside for a rainy day. But that's theoretical, right? Maybe we need another one, because we're still getting money out of the oil sands. But speaking of oil sands and all that stuff, and getting back to the carbon tax, I should expand on that a bit, because I just, in video number 8, I just said, carbon tax or do nothing. But there's actually 5 different options for dealing with climate change. So one is the carbon tax, and that is that most economists figure that that's the most efficient way to go, because it devolves decision making down to the grassroots level. Like, I can decide if I want to go to the donut shop that's half a kilometer away, I can decide myself whether I want to drive my vehicle there or walk there, right? Or for my house, I can decide myself if I want to pay slightly higher heating bills, or do I want to put more insulation in the attic, right? So it's, in that way, it's more efficient. Second method to deal with climate change is called cap and trade. I won't go into it. It's kind of complex, but it's very bureaucratic. You need I believe I wrote a column on it once. I'll put the link to it on there. But politicians like it because it's out of sight, out of mind kind of thing. Even though the costs for it eventually trickle down to the average consumer, but they aren't with the carbon tax. Every time you go to the pump, oh yeah, I see that extra tax that's coming out. But cap and trade, you don't really see it. Third way to deal with climate change is just regulation. Like, our government right now in Canada is stating that I think by 2035 you won't be able to sell, dealerships won't be able to sell gas vehicles anymore. They'll all have to be electric. Regulations are not very efficient either, because you're relying on the supposition that politicians are smart. Politicians know about stuff like that. I'll just give you an example. A GMC Hummer, electric GMC Hummer, the battery in that thing weighs more than my entire car. And that's, all sorts of issues with that, like where you get the rare earth metals and what happens when a 4,000 kilos? 4,000 kilos, I believe, for a GMC Hummer. What happens when it crashes into a Honda Civic, right? With that heavy battery in. The extra wear and tear on our roads with the heavy batteries. I mean, there's pros and cons to everything, right? But why outlaw all of that? Why outlaw that when you can? It might make more sense to just look at the overall efficiency of vehicles, like an electric GMC Hummer versus a smart car. Like, how much metal and plastic and glass does it take to build a smart car versus a Hummer, and or I was looking it up the other day. The lightest vehicle you can get these days from a dealership is a Mitsubishi Mirage, and you have to look at what's called embodied energy. And I wrote another column about this. It's not only the lifetime of the vehicle's gas mileage that you have to take into account. It's also the amount of energy it took to dig the ore out of the ground and smelt it into steel and build the damn thing in the first place. You have to take all that stuff into account. So, the vehicle I drive in the winter is 33 years old. So, and it gets 50 miles per gallon on the highway. So, it's the embodied energy in that thing. It only weighs 2,000 pounds. The embodied energy in that thing is fairly low, especially with the number of miles I've put on it, and so there's all those different factors to take into account. And sorry, I'm kind of going off on a tangent here. Fourth way to deal with climate change: just throw money at it. And again, governments love this. Especially if they only have to look, a few years into the future at the next election, and they don't, deficits and whatnot aren't really top of mind. Sometimes it makes sense, sometimes it doesn't. I mean, in my view, putting government money towards public transit makes sense, but putting tens of billions of dollars to battery plants in Ontario, and that battery technology is changing all the time. We don't know what the technology is going to be like in 10 years, but yeah, our government put tens of billions of dollars towards that, taxpayer money for battery plants, and who knows how that's going to wind up. Fifth option, dealing with climate change: do nothing. I mean, we live in a democracy, and it is an option, certainly one I don't agree with at all. One of the main arguments you'll find for that is, Canada only puts out 1.5% of greenhouse gases, so therefore, why bother? But I mean, take the calculation a bit different. When you look at per capita output of carbon dioxide, then Canada, Australia, the States, we're among the worst in the world. So that's not really a good argument in my books either. And also, you can draw an analogy to littering or something. If you say Canada doesn't have to do anything, then if I'm going down the highway and I've got a Tim's cup in my hand, it's a lot easier for me to just toss it out the window than look around for a garbage can, right? It might make sense from a personal point of view, spur of the moment, but it's not a moral option. And that ties into the notion of tragedy of the commons. It's an economics term, but Aristotle who lived more than 2,000 years ago, the Greek philosopher, he stated back then that which is owned by the most number of people has the least care bestowed upon it. And that's, our atmosphere. You can't own your own little chunk of atmosphere. It's everyone on this planet, atmosphere floats around, right? So, I guess that brings us to the science of climate change. Do Canadians, do Albertans need to have a citizens' assembly to look at the science? I don't know. It's only, I don't know, 3/4 of Canadians, or 2/3 or something like that figure it's a big deal. Maybe we should have citizens' assembly on that, and that brings us in the whole issue of what competing experts do you have to in a citizens' assembly to, again, go back to the video number 8 if you're not sure what I'm talking about there, but there are certainly climatologists that are not, there's disagreement among some climatologists about how serious it is. I think even some of the naysayers, the one name that comes to mind, John Christie, like he was, if I recall correctly, he was doing research on cloud formation and how much of the sun's energy rebounds back into space versus how much of the heat from the earth is kept in by the clouds. So, there are, and that's valid, right, to look at that stuff. But if you're just an armchair philosopher and you think the moon landings were faked and 9/11 was an inside job and that sort of thing, show your work. Like, if you have facts to show us, then let's see them. There's a couple books in that vein I'll recommend. This one, really good, Why We Disagree About Climate Change by Mike Holm. Goes into the history, and the history of climate science goes back to 1859. So 164 years ago, John Tyndall first was able to quantify which constituents of the atmosphere held back how much heat. So carbon dioxide, methane, water vapor, those were the big ones. So 164 years ago, he was able to do this in a laboratory, and today you can replicate that. You can replicate those results in an undergrad laboratory in a university, probably even in a high school laboratory. And a little bit later, also in this book, Arrhenius, who in 1896, so that's like 130 years ago, he calculated out how much heating the planet would undergo with the doubling of carbon dioxide. And the number he came up with 130 years ago is pretty darn close to what we're coming up with these days. So it's a good book, I recommend it. As for the thing that came out back in 2009, ClimateGate, that was interesting, and again, I wrote another column about that. But this book The Climate Files by Fred Pierce. And so it's McKittrick and McIntyre, two statisticians who saw some anomalies, or they weren't getting the data that should have been out there. So that's what brought the whole thing into being. So that's what this book talks about, and it's a really good read. I can't think of anything else here to talk about, and yeah, that should be good. Thank you.